Hey, it's me, Turbo Cellbor, the depressed bisexual who's going to teach you how to use Linux. Now, this is part 6 of a significant tutorial for what I like to believe will be a total conversion from Microsoft Windows to a Linux system. My goal here is not merely to teach you how to use Linux, but I want to give you the tools that you need to solve your own computer problems that may come up in the future. Just remember, this is a basic tutorial for people who don't know much about how computers work. I'm not a computer science guy, I'm a gamer, but I also have an absurd amount of experience using Linux for some mysterious reason. God only knows. In this series, I have to make the following assumptions about what you know about computers, and you will need to know these things if you're going to understand this tutorial. So number one, you need to know how to get onto the internet. You need to know how to download a file from your browser. You need to know how to use a mouse and keyboard. You need to know how to install software on your computer using an exe file. And most important of all, you got to have watched other videos that I made, okay? I explain a lot of concepts in those building up to this. So, moving on. In part 5, we discussed picking a distro, what matters, and how to try out distros in your browser without having to install anything at all. All right, that's what distroc.com is for, and I'm going to put that in the description down below. The instructions that I'm going to give in this video are going to be about a general overview of how to make a bootable drive to install a Linux distro. And I'm going to use Fedora 44 as an example. However, these instructions may not apply to every distro, nor will they perfectly map onto other distros. So let's say you're using Ubuntu and you look at these instructions, you're like, why is everything blue? Well, shouldn't it be orange? That's because I'm not using Ubuntu. So remember, the computer is stupid, and it needs a kernel to tell it what to do if you want to get any useful work out of the machine that ultimately is only designed to count to 1. Recall also that a kernel has to be loaded into RAM by a bootloader, which we discussed in a previous one. When we install Linux, or any OS really, 3 things need to happen. An EFI file needs to be created. A bootloader must exist that can be interacted with. And the OS kernel files need to be placed somewhere that can be readily accessed by the bootloader. So EFI, you're going to see this all over the place. The EFI stands for Extensible Firmware Interface. It is a small program present on the motherboard that provides a very basic set of controls over the hardware. It can execute mostly one type of program, the EFI program. When people talk about going into their BIOS or changing settings on their motherboard, what they're doing is they're interacting with the extensible firmware interface, okay? EFI is very basic. It used to not even work with a mouse, and it didn't even like have graphics for a long time. Now they look all super nice and cool and can use the internet and shit on a fully installed Linux computer. A hard drive usually looks something like this. There's an EFI partition, which contains the early executables, the EFI files that bootload the computer. There's a boot partition, and that's where the actual kernel lives on your hard drive. All right, that's where the bootloader looks and loads it into memory. And then there's, of course, just the slash, which is where all your shit is and all the other stuff that you think of as an operating system. To install Linux, all we have to do is create that environment on a computer hard drive. But we do this by creating a smaller facsimile of this system configuration on what's called bootable media. So what is bootable media? Bootable media is any form of storage device that can be read by a motherboard and load something into memory. Bootable media can be booted into, right? So it has some kind of interaction with a bootloader. In the distant past, we did this with both read-only storage like CD-ROMs and rewritable storage like floppy disks. You remember booting from floppy? I may not look that old, but trust me, I did boot from floppy. I remember I had to drive A for forever. So bootable media are usually removable. In the modern era, we almost always use USB drives, all right, at least for consumer level hardware. You see, to create bootable media, we're simply going to replicate the way the OS works when it's installed on an EFI partition and a boot partition, all those, and then we're going to put that on a USB drive. But there's a caveat, all right? So we got to talk about file systems, all right? File systems are how a computer organizes and understands data and storage. There are many ways to encode data into ones and zeros, and storing data in its raw form is actually not as efficient as it might sound, and it's often very prone to error. File systems are ways of encoding and managing files on a hard drive that account for things like error correction, data corruption, and reading and writing new data, and so on. Each one has advantages and disadvantages, and each one is not necessarily going to be interoperable with other file systems without some clever tricks. Look at how this physical disk is formatted in an NTFS file system, and now look at how it's formatted in an ext4. Both are ways of storing data, but they map the physical space very, very differently. The most common file system you'll see for the actual operating system is called ext4. It's been around forever. And then Windows uses NTFS. To ensure that media is bootable, however, the FAT file system is used. So this here is FAT, specifically FAT32. FAT file system designed to work with pretty much anything. And it is what motherboards need in order to interact with the EFI partition. The EFI partition is almost always formatted in FAT. Computers are like this because they have many, many uses and situations. Simply put, a motherboard needs a simple file system that allows reliably running EFI files, and that's it. It doesn't need to be like pretty or fast or nothing. It's just got to work. Any OS that wants to be bootable will probably have to have some ability to interact with the FAT32 file system. So then the question becomes, why don't we just use FAT for everything and just have one universal file system? FAT32 sucks, man. That sucks. It lacks the same kind of error correction and modern security features that other more robust file systems have. That just loves to corrupt files. And it fucking stuff up constantly, especially if you interrupt power while writing to disk. Even normal writing to FAT32 can fuck it up sometimes. I remember trying to play a DOS game writing to my disk once, and it fucked over my whole hard drive. It just totally corrupted the whole thing. I had to start over. I was pissed. I was annoyed. Oh my God. And this was when I was just a little boy. But the thing is, everything can read FAT. It's well understood. It doesn't have any like stuff that gets in the way of it getting read. So when we make bootable media, all we're going to need is three things, right? You're going to need some kind of physical media. I'm going to recommend a USB drive. You're going to need software to create that bootable media, and you're going to need an operating system in the form of an image. The operating system itself almost always will come as an image file. So getting a Linux OS is easy. The link to Fedora KDE to download is in the description below. This is a Fedora image file you see on the screen. The hard part, of course, is going to be preparing a bootable drive. This is actually the part that's the most difficult. Take this from someone who's installed many OSs many times. Making bootable media is one of the most error-prone parts of any OS installation, and it's almost always because of that damn EFI partition. So, like, how the fuck do you make a bootable USB? God, it's so much easier than it used to be. It's just software that magically does it now. There's just all over the place. And there's a bunch of different bootable media software out there, okay? There's a lot of people say, like, oh, I use Balena Etcher, crap like that. Every distro has one that they recommend, and they're all fucking wrong because there's only two bootable media writers I'm aware of that actually seem to work on the regular, and that's UNet Boot In and Fedora Media Writer. I'm going to be using Fedora Media Writer for these tutorials, okay? Now, I'm doing this video mostly on Arch plus KDE and on Fedora using GNOME. So I can just get Fedora Media Writer from the Software Center. Presumably, if you're watching this on Windows, you're going to have to go download the exe file and install it. You should know how to do that if you're watching this. I said so at the beginning. So all I got to do, right, is I got to take the physical drive that I'm going to use, and I'm going to take it, I'm going to plug it into a USB port, and I'm going to just open up the software and follow the instructions on the screen. Okay, so you want to know how to create a bootable drive for Fedora KDE. I'm going to show you how to do that using Fedora Media Writer right now. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm on a Fedora system, but this will be true also on a Windows system. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Fedora Media Writer. Oh, there's so many of these things I got on there. So we're going to be doing this with, again, we're trying to install Fedora KDE, which is an official Fedora image. So I don't even have to go to the website to download the ISO. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say download automatically. All right, and then I'm going to click next. And I'm going to select Fedora KDE from the official editions of Fedora. So Fedora Workstation is this one right now, and it uses the GNOME desktop environment. If you want to use the KDE environment, which is what I'm telling people to do, you're going to need to use this drop down and select the Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop, okay? It's out of the official editions. Then we're going to click next, All right. And we have options with the installer. So automatically download the latest version of Fedora that's like publicly released, and also will offer you previous versions maybe. Now, I recommend using the latest version. You also will ask you to select your hardware architecture. Okay. So this version is available for Intel AMD 64-bit processors and what they call Arch 64. So these are ARM devices. So if you have an x86 CPU computer, use this one. It's got to be a 64-bit, no 32-bit computers here. And then if you got ARM device, use this version. Otherwise, it won't work. The other thing is selecting the USB drive. And it is important to note that whatever USB drive you do this to, it will delete everything that is currently on there to put the bootable image on there. So be sure there's nothing on there you are going to miss. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select SanDisk Ultra. I'm using a drive that I've had for years. Works great. I've used it to install many operating systems. So the minimum drive size, I believe, is 8 gigabytes. I recommend a minimum of 16 just to be safe. No problem. This one's 128 because it's just big. So I'm going to hit right, and it's going to say, are you sure, dummy? You're going to erase the whole drive? And I'll just say, yeah. If you are on Windows, it may prompt you to authenticate in some way, saying, oh, this is administrative action or whatever. Don't worry too much about that because it's just basically formatting a drive as far as your computer is concerned. So I'm going to go ahead and approve of this action. So what this thing is going to do, first, it will download the image if you haven't already downloaded it. I did that earlier, and like an idiot, I didn't record it. Now it is currently writing to disk. So the ISO image for Fedora 44 KDE as of time of this recording was about like 3 gigabytes, maybe a little bit more. It took me not that long to download because I have fiber, but it might take you a lot longer. Same thing with the writing. So the writing speed, as it's creating the bootable USB from that ISO image, the writing speed is dependent on both the USB drive itself that you are using and its read-write capability, and on the transfer speed of the USB connection. In this case, I am using a USB 3.1 drive in a USB 3.2 port. And these are all the super speed, whatever, high speed ones. It takes about 2 minutes for me to write this, maybe a little bit longer. So other people, it might take you a little longer. The longest I've had it take to write this is on older versions of Fedora, believe it or not, was about 15 minutes, and it still produced a perfectly usable USB. So if it's taken a long time, don't worry too much about it. It's important to note I did an edit there, but it actually took about 4 minutes for that to write, where 10 minutes ago when I did this and didn't record, it took only 2. So it does seem to vary from time to time. So now what it does is it checks the integrity of what has been written. And this step has caught so many bad writes before, I can't believe it. I've had it, it's like, oh, fucked up, retry. All it's doing is, since it's already written the image and created a bootable disk, it's now checking to make sure it was written correctly. Because if you recall, FAT sucks as a file system, and this is written, at least part of it, in the FAT file system. Oh, God. Okay, so now that it's finished, and it passed the error check, now I have a fully usable, bootable image of KDE Plasma Desktop 44 on this USB drive. You note down there it says, restart and boot from your SanDisk Ultra to start using Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop. So that's what I'm going to do in the next video. However, if you wish to restore your disk that has previously been written by Fedora Media Writer and you're struggling, Fedora Media Writer has an undo tool right there. So if you have a bootable drive that was touched by Fedora Media Writer, it can detect that and then be like, yeah, I can turn that back into a normal drive. And honestly, I reuse the drives all the time, so I use this feature constantly. If you want to install something other than a Fedora distro, what you're going to have to do is download the ISO yourself from their website and then select the ISO file from your file browser using the selected file, okay? That's all you got to do. Hold up. Okay, so for Fedora, that's real easy. In Fedora Media Writer, you just literally can auto-select the Fedora thing. It will download it for you and install it onto the drive. You don't got to go anywhere. Fedora will, the Media Writer, to my understanding, primarily will only install ISO files. But chances are you're probably not looking at Linux distros that don't distribute themselves through ISOs. And so we'll just not worry about that for now. All right, so join me in part 7 where I'm going to show you how you actually install it. I'm just going to do it on the screen and you can see what it's like, and I'll explain why it asks what it asks as we go.